As a women's health professional, you already know the value in cycle tracking, but are you equipped to support your clients with complex cycle issues? Do you know how to read complex menstrual cycle charts? Were you ever taught specific step-by-step protocols to deal with irregular bleeding patterns, abnormal cervical mucus, chaotic basal body temperatures, and progesterone issues? That's where FAMM comes in. The Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program is designed specifically for women's health professionals with busy practices. We've cut out all the fluff so we can be laser focused on what you need to serve your clients better. Registration is now open for the next class of FAMM. Classes start toward the end of June, and early bird registration is open until June 14th. Apply today at fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 524. Today I'm sharing a brand new episode in my FAMM Practitioner series. I'm sharing my interview with Amanda Borucki, who is a current member of FAMM. And at the time of this recording, we actually are about 8 months into the program, and the program is a total of 9 months long. So Amanda is really deep into her practicum. She's really had the opportunity not only to learn the principles that we teach within the FAMM program, our protocols, our strategies, but at the time you're listening, she's also had the ability to apply these directly to her clients and in her business for several months now. And, so she's deep into her practicum work, and we've had many, many sessions together. So before we jump into today's episode, I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit about Amanda. She is a holistic health coach and personal trainer specializing in women's health. Her mission is to teach women body literacy so they may reclaim their health, freedom, and power. In a culture where we have outsourced all of these things, Amanda's driven to provide the missing education necessary to put us back in the driver's seat. She uses the menstrual cycle as the metric for overall health, which allows her to create individualized programs. She will teach you how to chart your menstrual cycles so that you can track overall health, prevent pregnancy naturally, and or optimize conception. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode with Amanda. And I'm really excited to be here today with Amanda Borucki. We are towards the end of our program, which is insane because that means it's almost been 9 months, and that really went by in the blink of an eye. So really excited to have you. Thanks for coming on the show, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, where to start? I'd love for you to take a little bit of time and introduce yourself to the audience. So the question that I like to start with most of the time is what was your first menstruation like? You could tell us a little bit about that, and then share how old you were and etc. And then just tell us a little bit about what brought you to this place where you were wanting to jump into fertility awareness as part of your practice.
Those are big questions that could go so many places.
Just like a softball.
So my first period was 12 years old. I was sitting in band class when it started, and I knew exactly what was happening. My mother was out of town, and I did not have a good relationship with my dad, so that was a little awkward. That was a lot awkward. So I had to call him and have him bring me clothes, and it was the whole thing. And I don't have a lot of memory after that time while I was at school. I don't really remember much of that transition. I think I blocked it out of my memory. I didn't have a lot of introduction. Even when my mom came home from her vacation, I was never really shown how to use anything. I was just really it was a free for all, figure it out. That was kind of my experience. So yeah, that kind of set the precedent for the menstrual cycle for my entire life, leading up to the last handful of years. So we didn't talk about it. I have a mom and an older sister. We didn't talk about it. We didn't really have any, it was just a thing that was there. And I didn't have really significant periods in the sense that I had pain or, I had really heavy bleeding. Like I didn't really have anything that caused me to disrupt my daily life. And so I just kind of lived with it and didn't really acknowledge it at all until many years down the line. And I guess I'll jump to like how I got into this work. And then if there's any other questions about the years in between that, I have been a health coach for 9 years. I've been in fitness. I've been in like lifestyle coaching, just holistic lifestyle wellness coaching. And in all of my training, I didn't have any women specific coaching or education. And so when I came to a position in my own life, when I decided I wanted to start to try to get pregnant and I couldn't, I didn't really know where to go with that. And so I didn't have a lot of information to work off of. And that really like it sent me down into this deep rabbit hole of my own health and my own menstrual cycle. And then it really illuminated me to just how much is in there and how much is unknown to the general population. And that's kind of what started me down this journey. And then when I discovered you, well, I had to do this program because I jive with everything you say.
Well, I mean, I always have questions, so I'll ask more, but I always find it interesting how we find our way into this work and your experience even of your first menstruation and how it was not something that was talked about. I think that that's pretty common. And it's ironic because you were one of three women in your home. So it would seem to set the stage for rich discussions of this topic, but you're certainly not alone in that. And when I look at those things, I think sometimes the first question can be, why didn't they tell me? But I've thought about that as well with my mom. She didn't know. So what was she going to tell me? Exactly, right? So, I mean, maybe share a little bit about even just when you discovered charting, when did that come about? Was it quite a bit later? What was that journey like, kind of going from not doing that to doing that? And maybe share with the audience if you had a bit of a birth control history, if you've used contraceptives or if that was not a thing for you.
Yeah. So I used hormonal contraceptives for, I guess, relatively short period, all things considered. So when I was 20 years old, I got engaged and it was just the thing to do to go get birth control. So I went to the doctor and I got birth control pills, and that was that. No conversation about options or anything about it. It was just, this is what we do. And I was on it for 6 years. And during it, I don't have any awareness of like what it did to me or how it affected me. I really was very disconnected with my body and my just everything at that point. And there came a time when, but nothing else besides my intuition is all I can say. Like my intuition said to stop taking it because I cannot recall like a specific reason that I was like, I need to stop taking this. But I just had this like really intense, like intrinsic knowing that I needed to stop doing it. And so I did. And then I think with about 2 or 3 years off of that is when I got the copper IUD. And I had that in for 2 years. And that was not a very pleasant experience. And I've had that out for about 8 years now. So as far as menstrual cycle charting, fertility awareness, like that never came onto my radar until about 2.5 years ago. And I had signed up to work with a coach. And my intention with working with her was to get kind of my physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual existence kind of ready to get pregnant and have a baby. And so I had some physical imbalances that I wanted to work on and other things. And so in the process of that, she asked me to start charting my cycles. And she didn't give me a lot of detail and information on how to do it. And I remember being really frustrated, and my cycles were really out of whack at that point. So I started sort of tracking, and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand it. And I think she didn't really know either. She wasn't trained. It was just something that she had done. And so in my frustration, I stopped charting because I just couldn't handle the fact that I didn't know what was going on. And the data was just making me upset. And then I think it was maybe 7 or 8 months later when I discovered Taking Charge of Your Fertility. And then that's when I discovered your book, The Fifth Vital Sign. And that really just sent me into this like whirlwind of I have to start charting and I have to start tracking and I have to learn all of the things about my body, and never looked back since then.
Hmm. Well, it's so interesting what you said. You were charting and you stopped because all these things were happening and you didn't understand them. And it was just like, yeah. And getting to know you and your personality. I mean, I always say that this work really attracts people who are super keen about this topic, obviously, because if you're going to go into the rabbit hole, you're super keen. But we also tend to want to know the answers. We tend to have a bit of a type A personality, a lot of us. It's not everybody, but a lot. And really detail oriented, right? Like we want to know what's going on, we want to know why, and we want to know how to fix it. And obviously we want our cycles to be air quote perfect, which I hope to shift away from that perspective in the program because it's not about that. But that's what we want, right? We want our cycles to be pretty and perfect. And so all I can say is I'm glad that you kept searching in that respect.
Me too.
Did you want to share a little bit about the copper IUD? I know you mentioned it. I always stick on that. Anyone who's listened to the podcast for a while and has heard some of those Pill Reality series episodes, for anyone who's kind of a newer listener, fertilityfriday.com/pill reality, it's obviously the copper IUD isn't the pill, but I categorize these contraceptive options under the same category of, at least for that series. And I've spoken to so many women who've had issues with the insertion process, and not that that was your experience, but share a little bit about what happened because it seems like things kind of went a little wild after your copper IUD experience.
Yes, it was a hellacious experience. I'm not even sure if that's a good enough word. So I was really, really wanting some sort of birth control option that did not have hormones. And I had a lot of anxiety in that 2 to 3 year time period when I was not on any birth control. And I was not in a serious relationship, and I was anxious and I really wanted something. And I think at that point, I did not really know or recognize that condoms were actually like a really like reliable and viable option. And so they gave me anxiety. And so in all the conversations with, the doctor and just like my research and, the copper IUD was like the best option. And I happened to be a good candidate in that I didn't have heavy periods. I didn't have painful periods. And, I didn't have all of these things that the copper IUD tends to make worse. And so I was like, okay, I sat with it for probably a year before I made the decision to actually do it. So I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I took myself to the doctor's office. They had told me to take 800 milligrams of ibuprofen in preparation, which is a significant amount. And I did
Like a
that.
flag.
Yes. And I didn't think anything of it at that point. So I did that. I took the 800 milligrams and I show up, and I have no memory of what time of my cycle I was at, or, if they recommended a certain time. I don't know the details on that, but it was the single most painful experience of my entire life. The whole thing, having it put in, and then just the several hours afterwards was awful. And that was with 800 milligrams of ibuprofen. And I remember I was there alone, so I had to drive myself back home, and I ended up having to sit in the office for like 1 to 2 hours after they were done because it was so painful and I was lightheaded and I couldn't transport myself. And then for the rest of that day, for hours, still just like so much pain. And, they said for the next probably week, it was going to be painful, and it was. And then from there on out, every period that I had was excruciating. And this was just so new to me because I had never even, on a scale of 1 to 10, my period cramps before this point were like maybe a 0.5 to 1. And so this was very new. It was quite awful. And a lot of the things I'd read and things that the doctors said was that, this pain might subside after, 5 or 6 months. And it didn't. It just was every single time I had a period, it was just excruciating. And I did what is often done, and I took ibuprofen and just carried on through my days. And I did that for about 2 years. And the same thing occurred with this one where I can chalk it off to nothing but my intuition. Like there was just some intrinsic knowing that like my body, it felt was rejecting the IUD in a certain sense. And so when I had that sense is when I started doing some research. And that's whenever I discovered about copper toxicity and how that can have relationship with causing your hormones to be imbalanced, and it can cause all these other problems. And immediately I had it taken out. And so I had it taken out 2 years after it was put in. And it has now been 8 years since I had it taken out. And the experience of painful periods never went away after I had it removed. And I wish that I had been tracking my cycles or paying attention to really anything at that point, but I wasn't. So I'm not sure the length of my cycles or the period itself, like how any of that changed. I'm not aware of that, but the pain has been present that whole time.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, obviously the copper IUD did something there. It's uncommon. Your story is uncommon, I think. It's not I've heard a lot of different stories about the IUD. So I've heard many women talk about how the IUD made their pain worse or their periods heavier. I've had many stories of women who it improved when they had it removed. But in your case, having this intense period pain that has continued, for almost a decade since having it removed, it does beg the question of whether something else is at play, and maybe the copper IUD exacerbated something that was already there. Hard to know if it could be the sole cause, if you know what I'm saying. So, as people listen to the episode, I wouldn't want people to think like, oh, now she's saying that the copper IUD causes all these problems. But what we are saying is that it's obviously involved. We're just not sure specifically what it did. You've had a lot of time to think about it.
Yeah.
How have you, I mean, what are your thoughts on that at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's been a lot of reflection of, what it could have done, copper toxicity. And after 8 years, I start to question, okay, some of that stuff like surely has healed by now or kind of worked itself out, cleared itself out, and all the lifestyle factors that I've worked on in that time period. And so at this point, I do have a sense that it caused problems and it wasn't the sole cause of the problems. So that the one thing that I really like take away from it is that when we add these external things, these exogenous things or external things into our body, and it interrupts our process, then it just kind of adds this other layer of like question of how that's impacting. And so we have less connection to what our bodies are actually doing. And so regardless of whether it's the sole cause of the issues, it did create a lot of disconnect from my body. And that is something that is really important to me now. So, it's been a kind of a love-hate relationship, but, I'm grateful to have the reflection of what did it look like to be separated from my body, and what does it look like now to have that connection and being able to like use the signs and symptoms and pay attention and address them.
Well, and I feel like the topic of the copper IUD in some ways is tricky because it is one of the only non-hormonal type methods, set it and forget it, air quotes, non-hormonal method. And so for a lot of women, it represents this fantastic opportunity to, avoid pregnancy to a high efficacy while not specifically altering your cycle with hormones. But then you get into the copper IUD research and you talk to women who've had it inserted, and there are still side effects that mirror the hormonal effects. And there's obviously this issue with insertion and removal. We've talked about this in class. Many women I've seen who've had IUDs inserted and removed. I'm not saying it's causal, but it's an observation that many do have a period of time at least where they might see less mucus, which begs the question of if there's a connection between that kind of insertion removal, if it's damaging any of those crypts in any way. And where's the research on that? Who's studying that? I haven't seen any paper. I don't know if anyone's even interested to do research like that, right? So there's a lot of unanswered questions that we don't really have answers to. So it's like anything where we just have to be informed of the potential risks when we're using any type of birth control. And just because the copper IUD isn't hormonal, I mean, people are really surprised to discover that many women do experience very similar, issues with progesterone, issues that do seem similar in some ways to the hormonal contraceptive side effects.
Yeah. And it feels really important to really provide the option and the education around fertility awareness, because that just wasn't on my radar. Like, I had no idea. I'm sitting here with all this anxiety, feeling like my choices are hormones, the copper IUD, or condoms. And I didn't really like any of those choices, to be honest. I was kind of anxious about all of them. And at no point did I have any idea that fertility awareness method was even a thing, like charting my cycles like that. And I'd never heard of that in my life. And so to have, for women to have that as an option when they're in that same position and they don't want the hormones, to have the option of charting the cycles and to say, oh, well, actually there's no risk, in the sense of it's not going to give me more pain. It's not going to be procedure that I need to go through, and I don't need to go to the doctor, and all these different things. And of course, there's inherent risk of pregnancy in anything if we're having sex. But aside from that, like, it's fairly risk-free, and to have that as an option, it feels really important to me to be able to provide that option, because I do think that it's something I would have considered had I been offered it.
You thought it would be easy. Teach them to chart their menstrual cycles, they said. Help them learn to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign, they said. And then you saw the charts. You saw things that you didn't even know were possible, and you really don't know how to interpret them. Fortunately, I've created the perfect solution for you. I want to share with you our top resource for women's health professionals: how to interpret virtually any chart your client throws at you. This new resource breaks down complex chart interpretation into an easy step-by-step process. It will give you the tools you need to better support your clients. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/chart to snag your complimentary copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/chart. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. Well, and interestingly, so, at the top of our episode here, you mentioned your field. You've been a holistic health coach for quite some time, and you had already specialized in women's health. So, I'm keen to hear your perspective now that you're kind of deep in the FAMM program, but I'm interested to hear your perspective because obviously you took training and you were doing this work. So, and given that you're in the program, you wanted to add this as kind of like that missing piece. You could take this question a lot of different ways. Like, you could comment on what was missing from your like training, and you had discovered fertility awareness kind of recently. This makes me assume that this was not part of what they were teaching it initially. So you can take this however you like, but I think you see what I'm kind of asking, where it's like, given that you were already in this field, how is it possible that this piece is missing from it?
How is it possible? Gosh, I've wondered that, because it's so big and profound. And I guess it's just like everything else, like the same reason that women aren't being studied in all the different studies that occur out there for fitness and health and anything in general. But that has racked my brain. Like, oh my gosh, there is not information provided about this. And I guess the answer is it's a lot easier to tell everybody to do the same thing. And it's a lot easier to ignore the menstrual cycle than to teach a woman how to train in the gym around her menstrual cycle, and it adds so many complexities to our existence. And we've tried so hard as women to, shove it down and forget about it and act like we're the same when we're not. So yeah, I feel like that's a multi-layered situation. And a lot of it comes down to just a lack of interest in diving into the fact that we are in fact different. And that doesn't mean that we're not equal, but we're different and we operate differently. And, it's been really interesting for me because I grew up more likened to tomboy, not quite. I'm not sure I would have called myself that, but kind of more on that spectrum where I enjoyed hanging out with boys more and playing with boys more. And, I didn't really know, what is this question of being a woman or being female or anything. And so that this whole process of diving into health through the lens of being a woman has been kind of like an existential crisis of sorts, because it's like I lived my whole life really trying to pretend like I was the same. And, I would work out in the gym like I was the same. And I have a pretty competitive nature. And so, I would operate myself and compare myself to the men. And really, I did a lot of that in every aspect of my life. And then now I'm learning about the menstrual cycle and how to live cyclically and what does that mean. And so I've spent a lot of time really shifting the lens of how I'm viewing life, how I'm viewing self, and how I interact with the world. And that has been a really big transition and a shift. It's a paradigm shift for my existence of, who am I and what does it mean to be a woman? And, that question is confronting. And I know that a lot of women are still in the position where they're not ready to have that confronting conversation with themselves because they're so interested in just carrying on in this life. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. It's a change of belief system really at its core, because we're shifting how we believe we are as women and how we should operate in the world. It's a lot. It's a lot to approach if it's not something that you grew up with. So, that it's loaded, right? It's a loaded topic, but
Well, I mean, we just came off of, so as we're recording this, literally like an hour ago, we were knee deep into this amazing in-house presentation by Alexandra Pope and Shawnee Hugo Wurlitzer, they were talking about the period of premenopause, which they called, our autumn in terms of our reproductive life cycle. And we'll have them I'm actually going to have them on the podcast in a few weeks. So for anyone who wants to learn more, stay tuned. But it made me think of that because what you're talking about, it is a whole shift in the way that you look at your cycle. And from my perspective, once you start looking at it this way, and once you understand how integral the menstrual cycle is to a woman's life outside of even reproductive, it's obviously integral to our reproductive life, but it's also integral because as you get into the cycle weeds, as we do in the program, you see how the cycle changes and shifts with what we're doing. If you're working out a lot, you see shifts. If you eat all the bad stuff, or I guess I shouldn't say bad stuff, but if you eat less optimally, you see the shift. If you make positive changes, if you reduce your stress, if you optimize your diet a bit more, if you start, addressing nutrient deficiencies, you see positive shifts. There's always this dance that's happening between your cycle. And when you're working with clients who have issues with their hormones or various other challenges that we can see in the cycle, it gives us a very unique and customized, tailored way to work with women. And I think I'm obviously obsessed. I say this all the time because I've been doing this for so long and I still find it just as exciting as I did when I first jumped into this field. But it's something that you said, Amanda, when you were talking about, like it was like the same thing you do for right? Like a lot of practitioners, I think, have their thing, like their 5-point program or whatever it is, where they put everyone through the same thing. But with the cycle, although we have a system as well, but the cycle dictates what we do because sometimes you have similar clients and you do similar things with them, but the cycle doesn't respond in the same way. And so you can't actually treat everybody the same when you use the cycle as the base. So I guess the question out of that is now that you're, knee deep into your practicum, you've been taking clients through this process, how has it changed your practice? Like how are things different now? How has it changed your outlook? What is different compared to how you were working with clients before?
It's so great. My favorite thing about having the menstrual cycle chart as like a diagnostic tool is that it really truly is providing this individualized metric. And so when you're in the health and wellness field right now, and particularly in fitness, but even if you're just like nutrition coaching and, the number one thing that people come to you for is weight loss, specifically women, weight loss, weight loss, weight loss. It's all the rage. And it's very frustrating to be in that space and to be fighting against social media and any kind of media right now and what the image is presenting to how a woman should look and the ideas that she's getting put in on, what the appropriate weight should be. And so you get somebody and they come to you and they want to lose 15 pounds. And the question is, well, why do you want to lose 15 pounds? And they don't really know the answer. They just have in their head that, well, 130 pounds is how I know I'm going to feel best. And they don't really know. And what I'm really most excited about using this metric for is that it actually, like, I don't have to like argue with a client over the fact that, they shouldn't actually be losing the 15 pounds because they need this weight, right? Like, I don't need to argue with them because I have this metric now that shows up like all of the things that are just going to tell them for me. So if they decide that they want to lose 15 pounds and that puts them at a weight that's actually underweight and an unhealthy weight for them, and it throws their cycle all out of whack, then I get to say, hey, if this is actually not a healthy weight for you because your cycle is doing X, Y, Z. So, then we can have the conversation of what would be an optimal weight based on the cycle. And so then we get away from, I want to be at this specific weight. And then we're looking at, I'm just going to get to the weight, whatever weight it is that causes my cycle to be healthy. And just shifting that perspective alone feels so potent for working with women because it's been really challenging to have that conversation up until this point because there's been no metric that's really truly individualized that can say, well, actually this weight's not healthy for you. And it might be healthy for Jane Doe, but it's not healthy for you.
I love that. As you were saying that as well, it made me think that it can go both ways because there are women who are naturally, their body shape and size are naturally very small. I don't know how much you've encountered that in your work, but I've heard this from people before where their body, like their families, like everyone's like really small, like slim. And people assume that they're under eating. And, so I've heard that on both ends, where if you are overweight, people can make all these assumptions. If you are perceived to be underweight, people can make all of these assumptions. And then, as you said, there's this kind of societal, everyone should look like this, which is totally insane. But if we have the cycle as the metric, then we do get to see that some women are just naturally, whatever, maybe a lower BMI, and their cycles are really healthy and they're great, they're eating well. They're just perceived to be a certain way, but we can see if it's truly working for them or not. And similarly, there are some women who might be perceived to be overweight, and doctors might want to attribute certain conditions. I'm always going on my PCOS rants where it's like if someone meets if they look a certain way, they're attributed all of these scenarios. But again, if the cycle is the metric, then it informs us in a completely different way where this person is at with whatever they're trying to do. So I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it's invaluable. Like this resource is invaluable. And in all of my years of training and education and research that I've done on myself, like I've never found anything that's like just more valuable and so easily accessible.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know me, I'm obsessed. So, so I'm definitely already on board. Well, as we start wrapping up today, I usually ask a couple of questions. I mean, for someone who is a women's health practitioner, maybe in a similar situation to you, where they've already been working with clients, but they're discovering this incredible additional piece, what would you say to that person, someone who's contemplating diving into the FAMM program? Like, what would you want them to know?
That really what I just said, that it's invaluable. Like that, having this resource is tapping into something that women need more than anything right now. And, I signed up for this and I like no turning back. Like I thought that this was worth it within the first month of signing up because just the conversations I've had with women and, the women that I've done work with through the practicum, like their feedback is raging enthusiasm. And one of them in particular has seen a lot of practitioners for a lot of different things. And she is 42 years old and she is like, I have never had anyone talk to me about this. I've never, been able to look for myself at any of this information. And she's just like raging. And so I can't even there are no words. There are no words to really describe the value of having this, because what I've seen and how it can help people and just myself in general, this resource is just so needed.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, my vision is to transform women's healthcare. And I've heard so many stories, and even in the program itself, because each practitioner works with several clients and we do our client case study presentations where we're anonymously kind of, bringing those clients to class so that we can dive deep into their cycle. So it really multiplies the number of stories that I hear. So the number of times that I've heard these stories where someone goes to their doctor and they're, barely listened to, they're not provided with any information resources, or they're provided with the wrong information. They're given a diagnosis, something that they don't have, or they're just laughed out of the office. It continues to fuel my fire to change things, because we could sit around complaining or we could do something about it, right? So that's what this is really all about. So I mean, I want to give you an opportunity. First of all, if anyone's listening, if you have any other last thoughts, feel free to chime in with anything you'd like to share. But I'd also like to give you an opportunity to share about yourself, where you are, website, links, all the places. If you have anything interesting coming up, how can people get in touch with you? All the things.
Last thoughts are dive into the rabbit hole and don't turn back. You won't regret it. Yeah. So I live in a nice tiny little town of Durango, Colorado, and have a nice community of people that I do in-person work with here. And for anyone that's not in this tiny little community, I can work online. I have a website, amandaborucki.com. I do have social media and Instagram. That's amanda.n.borucki. And my kind of disclaimer with that is that I'm developing my relationship with social media right now because I don't love it. And I want to believe that I can exist in the world without it. So it's there, and I am cultivating a relationship with it right now. So you may or may not find me on there. You can find me on my website, and it has all my contact information on there.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that. For anyone on the go, we'll make sure to share those places as well. I appreciate your stance on social media. It's a very time-consuming endeavor. If you are marketing on social media, it requires a lot of time to constantly create new content, all of that. So I appreciate your hesitancy there. But this has been an amazing conversation, Amanda. I really appreciate you for jumping on and sharing your story. I know not everyone is comfortable doing that. So I really appreciate that. And I just feel like, to use your words, like today's episode was so valuable in so many different ways because we were able to dive into so many different topics. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/524. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Amanda. It was such a treat to have her on the show. And one of the things that I always find whenever I'm doing these types of interviews is that even though Amanda and I have had many, many sessions together, so the program runs for 9 months. We have at least 39 calls together when we do the math week by week. And we have many sessions where they're, deep dive sessions within the group where we jump into her charts. We have sessions where we jump into her clients' charts anonymously. And we have a lot of opportunity to chat. But even with all of that, when I do an interview style podcast episode and I get to ask her to tell her story, I feel like whenever I do this format, I learn a lot more and I just get a fuller, better understanding of her story. So I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. There's so many interesting points that came out of today's episode, and I just wanted to highlight one. I was really thinking about what we had spoken about. Amanda fully went to receive her education and training, and she's been working in women's health for many, many years. And even with that background and experience, menstrual cycle charting was not something that came onto her radar for quite some time. I would argue that it's not just a cool add-on to be able to support your female clients with their menstrual cycles in the way that we do, using it as a diagnostic, being able to monitor overall health by paying attention to it in a specific systematized way. I would argue that it's essential and it really should be a mandatory part of your practice when you're working with women, especially related to their hormones, to their health, to their fertility, because you really can't separate it out. And one of the huge benefits that I found is that it really allows you to have a customized approach beyond any other tool that's available. Because the menstrual cycle shifts and changes in real time, it really forces you to not take a cookie cutter approach with all of your clients. You might think that everybody needs to do XYZ, right, in this order. But when you're looking at the menstrual cycle chart, you'll quickly find that some women respond very well to XYZ. And it's whatever that is for whatever issue that they have. And they respond quickly and you kind of see it happening even in a predictable fashion. But then you always have certain clients who don't respond that way. And when you have the menstrual cycle and you're able to have your clients track cycle over cycle, and you're able to kind of, track also what changes that they're making, things like that, then it really helps you to see who's benefiting from this and when it's not working the way you thought, when you need to course correct. So, in our practitioner training program, we still have a framework. We still have fundamentals. We have protocols. We have specific tenets. I mean, we're all humans, so we do have certain things that we need to do in order for our body to function optimally. But that doesn't mean that everybody needs to follow the exact same instructions and everybody can benefit from the same approach. So I hope that you really enjoyed our conversation today. And of course, for those of you who are listening who are women's health practitioners, of course, I'd like to invite you to join us in our FAMM practitioner program. So FAMM is our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship program, and we are starting our next round in just a few weeks. We're going to get started in July, and this program is going to run then over the next 9 months. So I really hope to have you in there. And if you'd like to join or just gain more information, head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMM. LIVE. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. And that's a wrap. If you're loving the podcast, then I know you'll love our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. It's a 9-month immersive experience that will completely transform the way you work with clients, allowing you not only to teach fertility awareness to your clients, but to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign and diagnostic tool in your women's health practice. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMLive to join the waiting list and be the first to know when registration opens up again. There's no program like this offered anywhere. Transform your practice in 9 months. Again, that's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE.